Chapter 2. Set your financial goals. I'm a certified financial planner by trade. You'll see that abbreviated as CFP in some books and magazines. I help people set goals, then achieve them. I've trained to guide people in managing taxes, giving them tips and strategies for lowering their taxes and investing properly. Essentially, I help people manage risk. What does that mean? Risk comes at us in a lot of different forms throughout life. It can be getting hurt on the job. It can be a relationship not working out, or a child needing specialized schooling. It can be more serious, like a life-threatening illness or a premature death of a loved one. That's often where our brain tends to go when we read the word risk, to the big, scary stuff. But in reality, we're all managing risk every single day. Risk can mean a lot of things. When you get on the road, you run a risk. When you get on a bike and go off-road, I run a risk. But the fact that we face risk doesn't mean we should lock ourselves in our homes. Setting goals touches on more than just investing. When we work with clients, our conversations are not just about picking great investments or figuring out what the magic number is so they can retire in 10 years, in 20, in 30, or maybe even next week. Whatever the person's goals, that's just one part of the equation. Those big picture goals are the ones that get all the glory, but the story isn't complete without a talk about risk. Life never follows a straight line. The road isn't always smooth and straight. If it's smooth today, then you had better watch out because tomorrow, or at least in my experience, there are bound to be twists and turns. When I talk to my clients about how I set goals and plan for the unexpected, I like to talk about balance. Again, going to biking. You know how much of the experience centers around the ability to stay on the bike. Do you remember when you were a little kid and you just couldn't make the bike stay standing? Do you remember someone holding the back to keep you balanced? And that feeling of flying when you finally got it in your muscles and bones and you realized you were riding on your own. Whether it was a neighbor, your dad, mom, or an older sibling standing behind that BMX bike. They walked along with you, making sure you stayed balanced. I don't know about you, but I was the kind of kid who never wanted to do it with training wheels. So I got a lot of scraped knees and foreheads and elbows. I have fond memories of my dad kind of jogging along the side of my bike, holding on, making sure I didn't bite it, at least not in the first 20 feet. I'm sure he knew as soon as he let go, that was exactly what I was going to do. But each run through got me a little closer. Each time I developed a bit more skill to ultimately find my balance. Life is about balance, in and out of the saddle, and making sure you keep your knees and elbows bent to be ready for anything. About using your body as suspension to absorb the impacts of hard and soft landings. Riding a bike is not always about going fast, but about learning slow speed cornering and leaning into still moving forward in control and balance. Investing your money is like this too. And sure, maybe with time, you'll want to get fancy. Riding a wheelie for a significant amount of time, bunny hop, and other fancy moves requires that you focus on where you want to go, but always keep the bike in balance. So it is with managing your money for maximum growth. Sure, you want to be interested in the riskier moves. I have clients with aggressive portfolios, but just as I advise people not to be too cautious, I also let them know it's best to keep things in balance, to make assertive moves while protecting yourself and your assets. Manage risk. There are a lot of things to keep in mind while trying to find this sweet spot. And it's different for everyone. It depends on your age, your goals, your income, and your risk tolerance. If you're married, it means also taking your spouse's risk tolerance into account, as well as their income, hobbies, side gigs, and desired lifestyle. And if you've got kids, that adds another element to the equation, as well as if you anticipate caring for an aging parent or managing money from an inheritance. Your mix is different from mine and from each and every one of my clients' investment portfolios. Importantly, it's different from that of most people you know too. That's why when your buddy tells you he's got a sure thing, he may not be wrong. It may be a sure thing for him, but it may not fit with your specific goals and lifestyle. Common mistakes. One of the first things you learn in biking, after balance of course, is to avoid grabbing too much front brake. As a kid, riding your bike, did you ever see an obstacle ahead and overreact by slamming on the brakes? If you had any kind of speed going, chances are good that you crashed over your handlebars. An excellent way to get hurt. The right response to an upcoming obstacle is to shift your weight back and reach a little on the brake. A drop seat is another advanced tool for these situations. Obstacle handling skills come with experience. So what does this have to do with investing? Probably the most common reaction I see when the news has some rumbles about this, or that stock looking shaky or market dropping, is to slam on the brakes hard. There's no slow and deliberate consideration of the fundamentals of the market and no insight into how the news media gets eyes on its broadcasts. By leaning into disasters and even amplifying them, paying extra attention to the bad and not reporting the good, nope. It's just let all my money out of the market. Unfortunately, this is one of the best ways to lose a lot of money that it will take a long time to recover. If you bought higher and sold when the market was low, it's not simply about the loss you're taking in the moment. It's about how hard it will take to get back to where you were. It's a really hard landing. In a major stock market correction, it may be 20 or 30% loss. The difference is that in investments, you can actually feel good to crash. Well, the loss of the money feels bad. Nobody likes to lose money, but the instinct that most people have is to pull out of the stock market and go to cash when things look shaky. Almost feels comforting. The feeling is, oh, at least I can't go down anymore. I've stopped the bleeding. That is definitely a false sense of security because now you're locking in that loss and the rebound is not there. You've crashed and are no longer scraping on the rocks, which is good, you think. I'm not going to fall any further. Still lying in the mud. That is not good. You don't want to be in the mud. You want to push into that fall and take off and keep going down the trail. You want to absorb those tougher landings. A financial advisor can help you keep your head in these situations. Sure, we can change your mix of investments. Let's not overreact. With historical experience and understanding of financial forces, not just in the short term, but in the long term, advisors can help you make decisions with a longer view. Let's call your financial advisor the elite drop seat of investing, the secret weapon that will help you thrive and, of course, stay on the bike through even the rockiest rides. A drop seat or a dropper post is a tool on a fancy bike that helps you with drops when mountain biking. So, for example, I have a higher seat because I'm 6 feet tall, and when I'm riding, I have a little button on the handlebars that I can push to drop the seat all the way down. If you drop the seat, you'll have a lower center of gravity on the landing. you'll get back on the pedals and be able to absorb the fall. It will naturally cause you to bend your knees because you're sitting lower, and it will make you hunch toward the handlebars a little bit. So your knees and elbows will naturally take the position that you need to be in to absorb the fall. That's what an advisor should do for you. An expert who advises you on your retirement is an advanced tool. Yes, it can look expensive. These drop seats don't come on your standard big box bikes. They're on the fancy bikes. And yes, financial advisors can seem expensive too. But if they can prevent you from going over the financial handlebars just once in your life, they pay for themselves and then some. The key is to stay relaxed in all situations. A good sounding board, like an experienced financial advisor, can prove valuable when the future looks dicey. Being scared and stiff will lead you to a crash. Nerves make you lose all concentration, and that's when things go wrong. Be supple on the bike and with your investments. You will also need to adjust where you are on the bike to be able to absorb that landing. Fear can easily grip you once you're airborne, especially if you look down at where you're supposed to land and there's a little turn to the left or the right. You're thinking, I got to get this thing under control so I can stick the landing and make the left or right turn. Investing can be like that too. One day, you'll get a report that this strange virus is going around the planet and people will be gripped with fear. And markets will drop down 35% in a short period of time. That's kind of like going off the cliff and being in the air. The question is how you handle that landing. And will you be in a position to ride up the next leg, or are you just going to wallow in the mud? Or get off the bike and walk? Think back to how you felt at the start of that COVID-19 pandemic. It was completely natural to panic. When we saw the unprecedented stock market drops, I like to use the example of 2020 because it's fresh in everyone's mind. And most people can still feel the fear. But you could use any market-shaking event as an example. So stick with the example of 2020. It bears remembering that even in this unprecedented once-in-a-100 years event, the market took less than 2 months to fall. And the majority of the rebound took less than 2 months as well. So anyone who decided to put the bike aside by pulling out all their money in the stock market took another 18 months to recover when everybody else was flying high in late 2020 and 2021. Those who panicked and decided to sit out were stuck playing catch-up. Even if they got back in, if they stayed in the mud, they were down 35% by selling low and missing the upturn. That kind of loss will take an investor 5 to 10 years to recover from. And we don't get an unlimited number of years. So let's say the person's plan before the COVID-19 pandemic was to have $2 million for retirement. Their new plan will be to have $1 million by the age they were planning to have $2 million, because they missed the opportunity to maximize their funds when they forfeited 10 years of compounded gains in the market by getting out of at a loss. That's an angle of risk that a lot of people dabbling in the markets don't consider. What's the cost of making panic moves, of overestimating risk? Too often, people don't think about that. They just like to blame external forces. Oh, it's the government. It's COVID-19. It's the Democrats. It's the Republicans. It's bad advice on the television. It's talk radio. They talked me into doing that. People can blame whoever they want, but the reality will still be the same. If you engage with a financial professional, you'll learn that there are levers you can pull during all kinds of market conditions, when markets are both up and down. What you need to know is how to do your part. In the end, the investor, not the advisor, always makes the final decision. You get advice, and you can either follow it or not. But when you understand how to look at the ups and downs of the market with a long-term view, you'll make money even while other people are making panic moves. How do you get ready for things as volatile as a pandemic? It's a tall order. Ideally, we need to practice when things aren't so volatile. In the biking world, that would be practicing in an open clearing or even a parking lot. Even in a parking lot, you can practice making better moves with low risk. Can you go slightly to the left or to the right and be in control? How long can you go without hands on the handlebars? You'll learn that your core has to be engaged to do that. It may stress you a little bit, but you need to relax to do it. Then we'll tune your balancing skills. It's not quite being out on the trail, but it's building the muscles you'll need to take on bigger challenges. Having an advisor can be like that, riding on the easier ground with someone experienced to guide you. You'll need to be prepared for the big dips and be able to make fast decisions. But where your skills really get honed is when you're riding slowly, learning to corner by leaning, when you learn how to adjust your strategy when things are relatively uneventful. You'll bring that cool head with you along the next downturn. And there will be the next one. If there's one thing I hope you take away from this book, it's that dips and sudden changes are a feature of investing. Like in life, you never know what the market will throw at you. But if you keep your head and make rational decisions, you'll more than likely coast into the retirement that you plan for. If you started early enough and contributed enough along the way, that may even be the retirement of your dreams. It's not enough to keep cool during downturns. It's also about remembering the ups and downs in the good years. Again, it's about balance. Don't just love the 20% return years. Don't get used to them. Sure, we'll try to go for them every time, but when you think to yourself, wow, this advisor of mine is a genius, we'll make 25% a year because we have the last 2 years. Get ready for a disappointment. Don't we all wish that were the case? But our goals are for the long term. It's good to bank those good years, but we're looking way down the road at the finish line. If you're looking to retire in 20 years, you can bet that means some pain somewhere is coming our way to get us back to that average. If you enter the game when the market is down, the key is landing the jump when you have to be able to absorb that so that you can come back and do that uphill, that next climb. Or maybe you're on an uphill and it's kind of boring. It turns out it doesn't matter as much where you're entering the market. Stick around for 10 years and you're going to experience all of it. Not sure? Just go 10 years back and look at a chart of the S&P 500. You'll see some of that wave. You go back 20 years, you'll see a whole bunch of ups and downs. So the point is that all of that's coming. It's not just in the past, it's in the future. All you need is a balanced view. Bonds, going to cash, and other ways to wipe out. A full crash in biking is going over the handlebars. In investing, it's going to cash. Getting off the bike and out of the race. You can go into bonds, which is a more controlled crash, so it's not over the handlebars into a tree, but that's a skid that makes you come to a messy stop after a few rolls. It's like laying out the bike and digging yourself pretty uncomfortably and thinking, no, I don't want to get back up. Maybe I'll just walk this bike. The problem is we know it's going to take you forever to walk that trail. Will you be safe? Yep. Will you finish it? Maybe. Barely. Getting to your goals is going to take forever, and you don't have forever. You get 100 years in a really good life. Most get maybe 75, maybe 80. No one knows. Frankly, as a financial advisor, I always tell my clients to plan like you're going to live to be 100 or beyond, so they never have to consider what happens when they run out of money and can't work. Since statistically, most people go before 100, that works in your favor financially. Investing at any age. You may have heard the adage that great retirements are made in your 20s. I love telling this to my 20-something-year-old clients, but less so to a guy who comes into my office for the first time in his 50s. But if you put aside even just a bit in your 20s, the truth is that the time value of money means you'll have a much easier time reaching your goals than someone who waited until later. Great retirements are made in your 20s, and they're made awesome in your 30s. If you keep going diligently in your 40s, by the time you hit your 50s, you're just like, why not? Let's go for everything. By that point, you'll have saved up enough that you won't be able to outspend your money with anything but the most lavish lifestyle. That's if you follow the plan your whole life. It won't matter if you started at the bottom of the crash in 2008 or when stocks were priced high. It doesn't matter when you started, because as you elongate that timeline, all those bumps are baked in. Having the discipline to save at least 10% of your salary, and preferably 20% in your 401k, especially in the early years, can make a great difference for the rest of your life. When you're earning the least, it can make sense to consider a Roth option. Although there are a few exceptions, so talk to your investment professional for advice on your specific situation. But generally speaking, a Roth option is going to be amazing in your early years because you can save your money, have a tax-free growth on both the contributions and the earnings that build up. In your younger earning years, you're likely to have kids at home, which means tax deductions. And let's face it, you're likely also making the least that you're going to make over your career. So you're paying the least taxes you're going to pay in the long term. That's the time to put your money into a Roth. If you invest right, you'll be paying crazy taxes in your 70s. You'll have that much money. Best to pay when your income is at its lowest, which is earlier in your career. If you do it right, investing in the long term can almost get boring, especially in the middle. The crashes are fearsome. The ramp up afterwards is super exciting. You can make lots of money, but most of the time is spent in the between. The slow and steady wins the race portion of retirement saving. We need to have these balance opportunities. One of the keys is to have discipline. I know we all hate that word, but discipline is the key to reaching your financial goals. Most employees want to retire early. Few actually plan for it. Wishes are not goals. I wish I had won the lottery, but I can tell you the odds are very low because I didn't even buy a ticket. If you want to retire early, but didn't contribute in your 20s, I don't like being the bearer of bad news, but it's going to be harder. Sure, you could get in an inheritance, but banking on these things like inheritances could turn into a big disappointment. What if your parents had you young and lived to 95? We should all be that lucky. What if they didn't invest as wisely as you thought and had more debt than you realized? What if they decide you can't take it with you and spend the last few years of their lives traveling and burning through their savings? Good for them. But there goes that inheritance. The point is, hoping for external things, like an inheritance or a windfall, is not planning. Many people make common mistakes when considering their retirement investments. For example, if you're an employee, you sign up to make a certain amount of money. They pay you on a schedule every 2 weeks or maybe monthly. You can plan with discipline how much you can spend on your lifestyle, vehicles, vacations, 401k contributions, and appropriate insurance. All of that can be managed because you know what to plan for now. Sometimes careers end early and someone suffers a disability. We plan for outliers like that as well. But most people will follow the normal track of being employed for most of their working years. The reality is that there's typically no huge upside to being an employee. Yes, you can get promoted. Yes, you can get a merit raise. You can get a cost of living raise. You slowly and methodically work your way up the ladder. It's a known thing how high the ladder goes, and there's usually a natural stopping point. The positive side of that is that you're not taking the risk. Sure, companies can go under and people can get fired, but you didn't mortgage your house to make sure the business stays afloat, the way some small business owners do. On the other hand, the upside of having a small business that can turn into a medium and then a large business, and it can become a much bigger than your capacity to work an 8 or 10-hour day. There's more risk as a small business owner, but also more potential reward. So as an employee, you're trading that upside of owning a business for a much more stable track. There's nothing wrong with that. I would argue that's because you're not taking that annual income risk. Your odds of coming out ahead are higher. Here's the rub. You must decide to have the discipline to invest that 20% of your income, not owning a business, which is higher risk, but in a diversified portfolio through your 401k. When you get to the end of your career, you will own something akin to a business, because that's all that stocks are, is owning slices of businesses. If you invest wisely all your working life, you'll be reaping the rewards of that in your retirement. For example, chances are good that Google is going to grow. GM over the years is likely to grow as well. Little disclaimer, this is an educated guess, not a prediction. I'm simply speaking about historical performance and what it could mean in the future. There's no guarantees. The point is that whether it's Google or whatever comes after that, it's a good bet that companies were going to thrive going forward, because some always do. Now, when you invest in stocks, you might have an Enron in there, unfortunately, or less egregiously, Pets.com. But that's why I make sure my clients have a big bucket of different stocks. You're going to have a Google or an Apple that hits the stratosphere, even despite the stinkers. And that's where the average comes in. Clients always ask, of course, well, can you just leave the Enrons out and just put in a basket of Googles together for me? If I could do that, believe me, I would. Not just for myself, but for all of my awesome clients. I do not have a crystal ball for that, but that does sound wonderful. And if you figure out how to do that, I'll be your client. The point is, we have to have diversification. And as employees, we want to be able to put a portion of that away to invest in businesses so that we can have growth and payoff. Living on the 80% of our salaries, like we're keeping for ourselves in the shorter term, is a stable income for our marriage, for raising our children, and for a nice house and car, for all those things that make life comfortable and fun. But you can still have the best of both worlds by owning stocks along the way and holding them for the long term in portfolios that are set up for long-term growth, not for a pop and a drop. Sure, we can have a few fancy things and try to ride short waves when something is taking off, but the majority of a retirement portfolio is made for long-term growth. When the market gets volatile, which it does from time to time, often people ask, what about putting money into bonds? That's loaning money, basically for a preset amount of time. Equities are owning a small sliver or shares of companies. Bonds are a half measure between cash and owning stocks. The problem with bonds is that they can still go down. As I'm writing this, bonds are down fairly significantly in recent years. Why? Because interest rates are going up. If you loaned $1,000 to a company or government and they said, we're going to pay you 3% for 10 years, which is what bonds do, now you're operating at a loss. You can hang onto this thing for 10 years and get 3%, but anytime you want to do something different, like buy a different bond or buy a stock or take it out for income, you will have to find a buyer for that bond. If you're not waiting until the end of the 10 years, but in the time rates have gone up, the whole world's getting, say, 4%, and you're accepting 25% less at that 3%, that stinks. That's a loss of money that you could have made easily in the marketplace. You're going to have to take a discount to sell that bond before maturity. Now, if you keep it for 10 years, you'll get $1,000 back, but you'll give up a whole lot of interest along the way. Either way, you're going to lose. That's loaning. Think about all those banks that made a lot of mortgages for 3%. But today, what could they have gotten? If you're loaning, which is basically what you're doing when you invest in a bond, wouldn't you rather have the 7% you can get today? So don't think your bonds are investments. They are loans without leverage. They don't build your wealth. And there's another factor at work, one that's been in the news a lot lately: inflation. Inflation is the diminishing of purchasing power. If $10 bought you something last year, you've got to spend $11 to buy that same thing. That doesn't sound like a lot, but spread out over everything you have to buy: food, utilities, travel, clothes, school supplies, electronics, cars. It really adds up, as we've all been feeling for the last year. If inflation is at 8% and you're in a bond at 3%, then there's no way to raise prices in your bond. On the other hand, when it comes to stocks, that's owning a small piece of a company. Preferably, if you're investing in a lot of different companies, all those corporate profits are up. Who's paying the money that's going towards profits? Who's footing the bill? Well, consumers. The cereal company is selling cereal for a ridiculous amount of money for a little bit of wheat. The farmers are getting more, the processors are getting more, the retailers are getting more. You're footing the bill. But if you own a piece of the company charging all that money for the cereal, you're getting the increase in those stocks. Bonds are a good solution for the portion of your portfolio that needs to be strong when the market is weak. Of course, this applies only to your retirement years, making sure you always have a bucket of investments that will be available during those down years in the market. That way, you won't be forced to sell stocks when they're down and give up years of gains on those distributions. That doesn't mean we don't pick specific stocks to have a high equity amount of stocks in our portfolio. Things like asset allocation within the equity world become super important in volatile times. That's another reason to work with a professional. A lot of people think the stock market is a gamble. The reason for that is simple. If you look at a graph for the S&P 500, you see ups and you see downs. Some years you put money in, even as wisely and carefully as you can, and you're still down 10%. If you get in, and that year you're down 20 or 30%, like in 2020, it can feel like you've gambled and lost. And what feels logical is to pull out and stop gambling. But over your investment life, you invest when it's up and you invest when it's down. We call that dollar cost averaging. So you're buying the up markets, you're buying the down markets. All along the trajectory of your career as an employee, you buy consistently up and down. If you have extra cash flow and you're not maxing out your 401k like you should be every year or getting close to it, you can contribute a higher percentage in bad times. That will help. But that's timing the market. And it's a little bit of a fool's game. Things don't stay low forever. And it's darn near impossible to guess when they're at the bottom. We know that only in hindsight. But the difference between investing in stocks and going to a casino is that there's no long-term average of winning in a casino. It doesn't exist. The saying, the house always wins, exists for a reason. If you're anybody within 3 standard deviations of normal, you're going to lose to the casino. In investing, it's different. The longer you stay in, the more you make. And the shorter you're in, the more you could lose. So when you look at it emotionally, it can feel like a gamble, but the results are very different. The stock market goes up in the long term. Companies increase profits over time, sell more units, grow their market share. As a shareholder, you share in that. If you're not diversified, sure, you're at risk, and it's possible to lose it all. Enron is permanently down at zero. But if you're working with a professional who puts money into a big basket of strong, wonderful companies, promising companies, the chances are excellent that you'll invest in many more companies that go to the stratosphere than the ones that tank. The truth is that investing is an emotional game as much as it's financial planning game or about being smart and doing these things correctly, covering all the risks, chasing down opportunities. It's about feelings. It may seem very cerebral, but the truth is that financial plans can be subjective and emotional. Unfortunately, that's when fear or greed can seep in. When stocks are going to the stratosphere, you can feel greed, the desire to hang on for more and more and more. All of a sudden, you're leveraging everything to invest more. You're borrowing money to dump in because everybody's going to buy pets.com forever. That's the future. Spoiler alert, it wasn't if you were around in the turn of the 1990s. Lots of people had dollar signs in their eyes in the 1990s and ended up with zero because they had made emotional decisions. Greed that can take you to places you shouldn't go, and fear can remove you from places you shouldn't always be in. Part of getting the retirement game right is managing our emotions. You will never be objective about your money. I've never seen it. I'm not objective about my own money. You'd think I would be, but I have my own advisor. It's a professional courtesy, and I do it for them as well. But it's helping me to make sure that I'm not being subjective about my own money. Yes, I lay out my plans, but I have someone check them to make sure I'm being objective. Money is emotional. There's no getting around it. Can I send my kids to college? Can I achieve the life goal of driving my RV around the United States for 10 years? Can I achieve the goal of having a second home in Hawaii? Those are all very emotional, meaningful dreams, and we only get one go around. But a professional can be objective about your money even when you can't be. A professional can tell you, hey, I understand this doesn't look good. Let me show you what history shows us. I can't promise what the future is, but we're going to stay steady. Because if we do this, this is where you can be. And we go with a plan that has always worked out, even though we can't promise it. Yes, I'm a fiduciary and we want the best for your money and for you. But that's why I'm being objective. That's why you're engaging with me, because I can be objective when you're subjective. When the question is, will you keep the balance on the bike? As a seasoned road pro, I'm giving you the objective best course of action going forward. Time is the greatest asset. It's the only thing money can't buy. When I'm 50, I can't get a do over, which brings me to another major nugget here. If I could go back in time and change one thing, I would use one big strategy that would change my life completely, monetarily speaking. I've done well for myself, so I'm not beating myself up too much. But I do wish I had known this when I was way younger. Remember, I had a small business on my dad's farm when I was 8 or 9 years old. He gave me that small piece to raise livestock on and said I could keep the profits. I ran my own books, filed my taxes. Later on in my teens, as the numbers increased, I did everything. It was a great learning experience. I was also part of the 4-H program. Then I worked for other farmers in the area. I had even a part-time job in town that I fit in throughout high school. So I had earned income from 8 to 18 years old, 10 years. We've talked about the time value of money. Let's say I made $2,000 a year back then, which I easily did. If I hadn't bought that red Z28 Camaro with everything in it and that really fancy motorcycle that was full of fiberglass, plus spent on all of those other frivolous things I won't even tell you about, but instead put a portion of that money in the stock market, I would have easily added millions to my portfolio just due to the time value of money. I could have taken a lot of pressure off myself to put more money away during my career. But of course, haven't we all said, if I only knew then what I know now? The reason I add this is not for you to kick yourself about the money you didn't save when you were 10. It's about what you can do for your own children or what you can tip off your friends and family to do with theirs. I've had my own children do this. By the time they're out of college, they will have at least an average retirement already set up when they get to retirement. That's a lifetime full of peace of mind for a little bit of effort on weekends when they were at their most energetic. And this tip is worth the price of admission right here. Your kid works at the pool as a lifeguard for a couple of $1,000 this summer and spends it on electric scooters and Starbucks. Let's say you save that extra money. You can actually put that $2,000 into an account for them. Even if they don't have the discipline at a young age to do it themselves, you can do this with your money because the IRS says that child has to have earned documented income to put it into a custodial Roth IRA. Not all firms do this, but work with someone who understands how to give your kids the greatest gift that you've ever given them outside of loving them and taking care of them. It's so huge, and it's simply due to the time value of money, nothing more. But if your kids are older, or you don't have kids, or if you started late and had setbacks, don't worry. Thank you for sticking with me until now. There's always a solution at hand. The best path isn't always the most direct one. Switchbacks can seem like the long way up the hill, but they're easier than biking straight up. Every life has some switchbacks. And the fact that you're here reading this book now means you can accelerate your climb up that mountain with a little bit of focus and effort. Don't forget to look at the big picture. We started this chapter talking about goals, and we'll end up with them here as well. Keep coming back to your big picture. What's it all for? What life do you want? Remember to take care of the planet, respect the trail, and respect the earth. This can mean looking into ESG funds that focus on the environment, or social governance, biblically responsible funds, or just good old-fashioned fiduciary responsible investing. But keep asking yourself, what's the bigger point of this grind? What hill are you looking to climb? Control your momentum, and you can clear almost any obstacle. The wheels are round and will go over anything. Remember the law of averages. If you take the appropriate risk, not too high, not too conservative, diversify, and apply the right timeline, you'll have a high probability of reaching your goals. Enjoy every minute and keep the rubber side down. Life is a journey. Find the right balance between having fun today and investing for the future, and you'll enjoy peace of mind, security, and the life you've imagined.